For Indigenous women, for queer Indigenous women, sometimes being in our bodies can be very vulnerable, objectifying, it can be lonely. So if I can write a poem, perform a poem that helps another Indigenous woman, especially queer Indigenous women, whew, that's my voice coming back to me, not apologizing. But if I can write a poem that makes her feel recognized and more able to be in her body, that makes me proud.
This episode engages Hawaiian worldviews in social contexts and explores themes of sexuality, gender, and erotics. Some language and content may be considered strong or triggering. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Aloha mai kākou and welcome to Kūkā Kīkī, a Mahu-led podcast where we Kūkā and Kīkī about Kānaka sexuality, gender, erotics, and all things Mahu. This is a gathering of friends and community rooted in connection, joy, and resilience. Today we're joined by Dr. Noʻu Revilla and Kamakani Albano, two Kānaka scholar poets and aloha aina. In this Kūkā Kīkī, these two dive deep into Hawaiian erotics, belonging, transformation, becoming, and intimacy. Central to our conversation is the liberation of wahine, the poetics of brackish water, and the freedom of peoples from Hawaii to Palestine. Well, mahalo anui a olua for coming and joining us today in our conversation at Kūkā Kīkī. I'm just super honored. We are super honored here to have both of you, Noʻu and Kamakani, come and join us. It's not every day we get to talk to poets and those familiar with poetic language, the intimacies of our kupuna, erotics, and how all of those things are sort of intertwined. And this time now where you folks are hakuho and just hakuing new pieces and bringing that to life, particularly with this special issue of Hulili that you folks were both contributors to. So thank you very much for coming, Noʻu and Kamakani. I want to first start off with, if you can just share a little bit about your aina hanau, and perhaps a kupuna that have guided you in your life or continue to remain steadfast in your journey. I think we'll start with Kamakani.
Yeah, so aloha and aloha to you, Noʻu. Mahalo Kaʻimi for having the both of us on. So I was raised in Kalihili o Laumiha on Oʻahu. Today I reside in Kaneohe. I'm also in different ways was raised in Waikiki, and sort of just different ways that I think about aina hanau, genealogically connected to the island of Maui, particularly the Hana and Paia places.
We might be Ohana.
I know. I was like, oh my gosh, I had a feeling today. I was like,
All might be Ohana.
Ohana. Yeah. So I was recently doing more of like a deep dive into my mo'okuauhau, and the like Hana and Paia kept coming up over and over again. One of my great-grandfathers actually immigrated from Puerto Rico to Paia, and that's where he had met my great-grandmother. And that's kind of like, I've just been doing my best to trace that as much as I can lately. And it's been really beautiful and eye-opening and transformative. When I think about a kupuna, I've been thinking about her all the time, but so much more most lately. I've been thinking so much about, as I've been writing, about my mother, just thinking about her and how she's looking at me from Po, and her name is Chastity Lehualani Alvarez. And I've been thinking a lot about what it means for her to tell me over and over again that poetry is the language that she taught me.
Wow.
And so she is my first love letter, and she is the kupuna that I've been thinking about so much.
So poetry runs kind of in your ohana then?
Well, she kind of was, in different ways, poetry was how she taught me how to survive.
Mahalo for sharing, and thank you for bringing your mom into the space.
Yeah, mahalo.
Noʻu?
I have had the pleasure of reading Kamakani's writing about their mother, and it's just been so beautiful to read and see the way that you've evolved writing about her. So that's a beautiful makana. So mahalo nui loa for trusting me with that. Mm-hmm. So let's keep the Maui train going.
Yeah, let's keep it going.
Born and raised on the island of Maui, my great-great-grandmother, Kamila Haumea, my great-grandmother, Elizabeth Puninani, and my grandmother, Laie Kawai Kanana, all from Ha'o'u on the east side in Hana. But for high school, my grandmother was able to move to Wailuku and attend Baldwin for high school. Wow. And then after that, she met my grandfather, who's from Cebu in the Visayas in the Philippines. And sadly, he died before I was born, when my father was very little. So my grandmother, Laie Kawai, raised her ohana first on the plantation in the camps, Camp 5, then they had to go to Alabama camp. The plantation shuttered. Then they went into Kahului. We lived with my grandmother, my father, my mother, and my sister until we moved to the beautiful Wai'ehu in Nawai'eha.
Wow.
I've been writing about my grandmother and my father pretty much since I've been writing. Mm-hmm. But my family is a very Wahine identified family.
Nice.
You know, the Wahine stand up, you know? And it's like this collective energy. Like I have aunties who can hula the ocean into a tuna can if they wanted to.
Period.
Wow. I have aunties who, the gossip. Oh my God, that's like one of the first storytelling forms that raised me. I mean, that's how you understand kauna, I think, as a child first, gossip.
Yeah.
Right? Because the second somebody enters the room, you're like, and then that's how you know timing, right? But I think about my grandmother because she went through a lot, very, very young, losing her husband and then having to raise all these children. And then going through that time period in Hawaii where sugar was just decimating water and our aina, and then moving and experiencing the plantations, and then moving into Kahului, which was dubbed the Dream City, right, in the 50s, to kind of get us thinking about this is how we're going to be part of the American dream.
Right.
But she was also like a radical gambler, you know, and like the only woman caught in raid after raid after raid because you got to survive, you know. Her husband was gone, and so I've been thinking about her and beautiful Laie Kawai.
Wow, that was her name, Laie Kawai.
Is her name.
92.
Oh. Yes. Go, Grandma.
Wow, 92. She's 92. Kicking it.
And still feisty. Every time I bring my wife home, flirts with her. Just like,
really?
Oh my God, like uncontrollable flirting. Like she like goes right past me, and she's like beckons to my wife, come sit. How are you? Yeah, but she's still going hard.
Oh, I love that. Mahalo for sharing. Mahalo to both of you for sharing about your kupuna and the histories that gird your writing and have shaped who you are today. I feel like that's so important to ho'olau now from that place, you know, in Hawaii spaces, because that's how we can like relate and be like, oh, we might be related, you know, we might have the same kupuna or similar backstories, and we can build that pilina from that place. I think moving on, you know, thinking about your literary work, I wanted to start off with asking Kamakani about, you know, literary ancestors, perhaps teachers or lineages that have influenced your writing today, and you know, your writing, your style, your perhaps even your essence, your inspiration. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. And it goes without saying that I'm really grateful to be here with one of my kumu, who is a big literary mentor and just someone who really inspires me, Noʻu. I'm constantly always inspired, especially by Oiwi, Pacifica, and other Native writers, especially those. I've been reading a lot of, you know, queer, trans, mahu, and wahine poetry from throughout the Pacific a lot lately, because I've been thinking a lot about this idea of what it means to live in the brackish. And what And I'll talk a little bit more about that later because I'm like feeling really honored to talk about that. Yeah. I would say, just to name some of them, some of my big inspirations, Kai Gaspar, Brandy Nalani McDougall, Ku'aloha, Ho'omana Vanui, Haunani K. Trask, and so many others, even some of my dear friends, Kalilinoy Detweiler, Ariel Taitano Low. I've had the privilege of recently also traveling to Lenape-Hoking territory with Noʻu also for the Indigenous Nations Poets retreat, where I also had the opportunity to build relationships with other Native writers and mentors like Jake Skeets, Leanne Betasamose, Simpson, Kimberly Blazer, Annie Winstrup, and so many other amazing Native writers that have been really shaping how I think about the use of punctuation and language. So many of them have really encouraged me to think about how I think about the weaving of of Olelo Hawaii and Native languages. What does it mean to breathe life through that? And there are so many others. I've also been reading a lot of Palestinian poetry and thinking about what it means to live and what it means to witness and moving beyond witness. How does poetry move us beyond witness? And I've been thinking a lot about what that means and looks like. So those are just some of a vast ocean of literary writers and earths I've been thinking about. So
very vast ocean, but it sounds like you're navigating and finding your way through that ocean. I love that we were talking earlier too with Kamalani just about kuleana and awamuing kuleana and where that takes you and being like kind of, you have to, when you're kind of coming into literacy, you also have to accept the kuleana that comes in with certain literacies. And,
absolutely.
With finding poetry and poets and meeting them, your heroes and stuff, you're also awamuing, parts of their ike as well and bringing that with you. So that's really special. And thank you for sharing about your journey so far through this vast ocean. And I'm excited to talk more about waikai and what that means to you and how you're kind of thinking through waikai. I think that's so fascinating. Noʻu, this question is geared more toward you, but I wanted to ask, if it's okay, how do you situate yourself within a Kānaka and Mahu genealogy of writing and speaking? I know that's kind of like a right to the point, but I felt like this question I could resonate that question with you.
Well, I think what Kamakani's instinct to say this goes beyond Hawaiian and we have to talk about larger Oceania. So my na'au is like, it's never just us here in Hawaii. It has to go to our cousins in Micronesia and Melanesia. But whenever I think about, and you're talking about kuleana, right? And for me, there's no conversation about Hawaiian literature or Hawaiian politics without Haunani K. Trask.
Period.
And I am a lifetime student of Haunani K. When I'm thinking about kuleana, there's this idea of ho'olulahui. And for women, for cis women, often one of those unspoken, not really, highly spoken, kuleana is to bear biological children.
Yes.
Haunani K. Trask is one of the most important leaders in Hawaiian history. She is responsible for us having Hawaii Nui Akea. She is responsible for so much empowerment through generations. She's so responsible for the way our political analysis has developed over the decades. She did not bear biological children. And she was perhaps my first teacher in there are many ways to ho'olulahui as a wahine. And one of the formative texts of hers for me is a poem called Sons, because there's these lines that say, and say it in your sleep, I do, Haunani. It's, I am slyly reproductive.
Period.
Books, ideas, history, reproducing the rope of resistance for unborn generations. She may not have had biological children, but her haumāna, her mentees, the people she taught political strategy, the people she taught poetry. My first class with Haunani was actually modern women's poetry in Oceania. So she didn't just focus on Hawaii. Her lens was all of us in Oceania. And for me, that poem, Sons, and her idea, that language of I am slyly reproductive, was such a gift because she was just this sterling model of I can contribute to my lahui without muting or hiding or distorting important parts of who I am. Because I am a proud oiwi wahine who loves her lahui. But I'm also, I am also an oiwi wahine who proudly loves her wife, who believes in the value of indigenous feminism, who will have a full and happy life without bearing biological children by choice. And when I was growing up, that was not a choice.
Right.
And she's just through her scholarship, through her politics, through her teaching and poetry, she's just modeled so many ways to be fearless and unapologetic and yet so tender.
Yeah.
So any conversation about kuleana or kumu has to include her for me.
Mahalo. You know, something that I've spoken with people about before is just how much she struggled being a wahine, and then also the stigma of not reproducing like children in the traditional sense, which is where she came up. You know, the idea of slyly reproductive really stems from just because I'm not literally ho'olulahui can also be something that is much more expansive to encompass other ways of reproducing ike, pilina, and influencing, you know, a whole generation, multiple generations of haumāna who she literally, you know, in a sense, hanaud, right? And I think that's so powerful. There's, you know, especially too with mahu, I feel like there's this idea that we're somehow, you know, I've talked about this earlier in the podcast, but somehow we're betraying our people by not reproducing in a sense, but it completely erases all the ways in which we are reproducing the world and worlding. And so mahalo for bringing it back to kumu haunani. This question is for both of you. In both of your works, you know, for those who are not familiar with the kind of work you do, could you first please just share a little bit more? I know we talked about poetry, but maybe give a little more insight into the kind of work you do. And then also, can you share about oceanic feminisms and erotics and how they guide and inform your work? This is a really important part of the mo'olelo that I think I want to touch on. So we'll start with No'u, perhaps?
Okay. So I think two things that shape the pico of my work are indigenous women are worth protecting and indigenous women are worthy protectors. And that's my pico right there. And it's not a surprise because I was raised by these strong Maui women. So my first book, Ask the Brindled, used mo'olelo of mo'o, from which both sides of my family descend, to grapple with questions about desire and healing. And my next book, which I'm working on right now, is grappling with questions of women, water, but specifically intergenerational relationships between Hawaiian women on Maui. And so, you know, for me, there is no writing about desire without aina, and there's no writing about aina without desire. And that, I think, that's my pico today.
Wow.
Yeah. What about you, babe?
Yeah.
Oh, mahalo for that.
Yeah, mahalo.
So kind of like what I was alluding to earlier, my work really, I think right now, I'm like in the process of writing a book and of like this debut poetry collection, if you will. I've been thinking a lot about that, especially since we came back from New York, about this idea of what it means to live in the brackish. And by that, I mean, what does it mean to think about the confluence of Kane and Kanaloa, of freshwater and saltwater. And I actually keep coming back to the question. Noʻu, you once beautifully asked me is my work grappling with a poetics of release or a politics of release? And as I was ruminating on that more, I was really thinking about where do I situate myself in my relationship to my body of this idea of wanting release, a release of dysphoria, a release of just feeling like I'm not of like this relationship that I feel like I have to constantly like tear off my skin, and I think about this idea of is a politics of release or a poetics of release, and in a way that helped me to think about like, okay, what is this like this confluence of fresh and salt water? Maybe it's both simultaneously, because I don't think that they're inseparable, because you also say poetry and politics run in the same river. And when I think about what that means and your teaching of that to me, with my own background, in studying indigenous and Native Hawaiian politics, was thinking about how if release, if surrendering, if desire, if yearning, if fury means that I choose to be soft and still at the end of the day, I would rather live in a place of brackish water, where Kane and Kanaloa confluence, that idea of poetry and politics coalescing, that is ultimately where I feel my skin emerges from. And so this idea of living in the brackish, I'm really grappling with questions of what does it mean to survive as a Mahu Oiwi person? How do I, if I were to write something to a younger Mahu person that affirms that in this colonial world in which we find ourselves, that we're still able to survive, we can witness each other's shedding. we can acknowledge and affirm that that's happening. And it's possible to survive, because like Indigenous women, we are also worthy of survival and living, especially when we are raised by Indigenous women. Right. And so I'm grappling with different forms of how do we just ask questions? What does it mean to ask questions? And I'm always finding that I'm asking questions at least once in each of my poems. Because I cannot, sometimes the questions are reflections and portraits. Sometimes the questions are just things that I have absolutely no idea how to answer. But ultimately, I write it so I can feel held. And ocean feminisms, I think, I first stumbled upon that actually when I was reading Ku'aloha Ho'omanawanui's piece in the Amerasia special issue on ocean feminisms, He kai ka pu'au, he pu'au ke kai. And I was thinking about that, of this idea of Moana Nui Akea as the oceanic womb of Papahana Moku. And that was around the time right after my mom had passed away. And so I was thinking about what it means for my mother to literally, on the day of her passing, to tell me all I want to do is go to the ocean. But she never got there. And so, and for me to be the one to lead in ensuring that her uhane rests in the ocean where she wanted, like it to, like her ashes to be dispersed into the ocean, that particularly the place that she loved in Makaha. I've been thinking about what it means to yearn for that cradling again. And at the same time, I found that being near the ocean was not only a way for me to remember my mother and what it means to feel held in the same way, but also what it means to desire love and intimacy and yearning for that relationship, not just with my mother, but with my own body, because I was not there yet. Yeah. And that's still a question I'm answering. Am I there yet? At what point do I know that I'm there? And so I've been thinking about this idea of the brackish in the context of a local i'a, for example. I've been thinking a lot about in our class, in things that I've learned with you, No'u, this idea, for example, like the volta in a sonnet as a door opening, as Danez Smith says. I've been thinking about this idea of in a lokoʻiʻa in which water flows to create brackish water for fish to thrive and grow in. There are these sluice gates, the makaha, and I've been thinking about that idea of what does it mean to flow in and out in the context of mahu in relationship to in like that pilina to mahu and to the body, but also like what it means to ask for consent to enter. How do we if there's multiple makaha to enter through, how do we ask permission and ask for consent to enter, because it's not meant for, like, not everything is meant for everyone. I'm certainly not rated E for everyone, that's for sure. You might read some of my pieces or think whatever, but I'm certainly not E for everyone. However, I've been thinking about what it means to live in that mode of the brackish, and I think that's been helpful for me to think about what mahu means in the context of my own relationship to myself.
This is abundance. That's like 10 books, babe.
I know.
I was like,
Yeah.
That's why it's been so hard to write this, because there's so much.
It's a good hard, though.
Yeah.
It's a good hard.
It sounds like it's just flowing, though. You know, like it's just it's Kīkīing, if you will.
Very that.
Yeah, very that. Oh, mahalo Noʻu. Do you have mana'o? About what Kamakani was sharing.
I mean, just affirmation. I mean, the Muliwai has been important to me as like a real space because I was raised by a lawai'a, but also as a like oiwi site of inquiry and creativity. But, you know, I think it's just, I love poetry because poetry slows you down, and anything that slows you down in 2025, Lord have mercy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it's so hard to slow yourself down. Yeah. Poetry slows you down and it makes you pay attention, and you have to choose the right word in the right words in the right order at the right time. And that kind of attention and care for the language we use, ika olelo no keola, ika olelo no kamake, right? So that for me means poets are very meticulous about what am I actually trying to say. And we get into a lot of trouble at every different scale of our communities, leadership, when we start just talking, but we kind of lose sight of what we're actually trying to say.
Yeah.
What are we actually trying to get done? And then poetry is also a beautiful education, because you can't create pono poetry with integrity, if you're a shitty listener. You have to be able to slow down and listen. And again, in 2025, I mean, for a lot longer than that, I mean, how many conversations do we have where you're just waiting for the other person to finish talking, or the person is just waiting for you to finish, and you're just talking hot air to each other?
Yeah.
There are many ways to slow yourself down. There are many ways to be a better listener and a better participant in conversation. Poetry, for me, is one of them.
I think you're also, it sounds like you're touching on a loina Hawaii around knowing when to be silent, and you know, something that I think is missed sometimes in Kānaka spaces, like knowing when to be silent when it's your turn to speak, but it's really, you know, knowing when it's your turn to really listen, absorb, and learn. Something that we did with our kupuna, because you never just talk any kind to your kupuna, right, when they're sharing with you. So thinking about poetry also aligning with loina Hawaii, I'm also curious too about, you know, hakuing. You folks talk about this genealogy that you belong to and have worked with in poetry. Also something very Hawaiian that is to kind of bring those genealogies into newer compositions, right? When you haku. Is this also something in your work that you do, these sort of homages to you know, and maybe ho'ailona, if you will, to others who love poetry and are well versed, that they can say, like I see this connection from this genealogy happening here, right? This thread of ike or wisdom, like moving through this piece. Is this something that you guys, like, you have moments of maybe like, I'm gonna just add this in because this feels right for this piece, but it also connects me to this person who shared this ike with me. Does that happen too with your work? Not a question that I sent you, but I was just curious because we're getting along those conversations. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a poem called "How to Swallow a Colonizer," and it repeats a line from a Haunanike Trask poem called "You Will Be Undarkened." And I've studied this poem. I've written about this poem. I've performed this poem, Haunani's poem, and so I've constantly been thinking about what she meant by "You will be undarkened." And if for those of you who haven't read it, please go read it. Light in the crevice never seen. It's beautiful. But for Hawaiians, darkness is not an antagonist. Darkness is not bad. Darkness is not heaven. Darkness is just so fulfilling and beautiful and enriching and nourishing. And it's really against that Christian binary of light and dark, evil and good, that Haunani's work, both scholarly and poetic, kind of activated against, right? So to find this line in her poem, "You will be undarkened," I felt like, whoa, what do you mean I'm going to be undarkened? So I remember when I first read it as a undergrad, I was really confused. I didn't know. I thought we were going into this kind of OEV space of po is beautiful and darkness is good and brown, But then I studied some more. I talked to kumu like aloha, Omanavanui, poets like Brandina Lani McDougall, who are also mentored by her. And then paying attention to the fact that there's so much vai in that poem. It's not just light, dark. There's also so much water in that poem. And the water really is the thing that kind of trains your attention. So I have this poem, How to Swallow a Colonizer, which is really direct. You're swallowing a colonizer, metabolizing him in your body. And it uses that line, "You will be undarkened," as a thing to say, I'm taking in this heva, but as I'm metabolizing it through my beautiful brown body, I'm telling this heva thing in my stomach, you are going to be undarkened from what my body is doing to you. And that's a shout out to Haunani.
Oh, mahalo.
Beautiful.
I gotta read your poem. How to Swallow a Colonizer.
Get into it.
How to Swallow a Colonizer.
It's a lekapi, if you will. That's beautiful. I often do think about po and darkness as being, like you said, a rich, like nurturing space, a place where ike comes from, a place that we visit when we sleep. And so that is quite intriguing to see this idea of being undarkened, and like kind of the layers behind what that mean, the potential for that, those two, those words together, what that could mean. So thank you for getting me, I'm like, my mind is kind of going in circles a little bit. Kamakani, what about you? Like in your work, any sort of threads of wisdom that,
Yeah, for sure.
Kaʻimi.
Oh my gosh, I want to like kind of bounce off the idea that this darkness, and because I actually was just writing a piece like yesterday. I've been thinking about this idea of confluence, of I've been thinking about this idea. There's a line in the Kumulipo that in English is interpreted as darkness slips into light. And so I've been thinking about what does it mean to like slip and slide between darkness and light. And so I've been thinking about like ao and po as like imagining them like if they were lovers with each other. As lovers, what would it mean to like think about this like slipping and sliding in a way that ultimately the first question that is asked is, can you wash my hair? And what does that mean, like to have such an intimate thing, to be like, I trust you to wash my hair for me, something that is so deeply sacred and important to me. I've been thinking about what it means, I keep going slip and slide, and it's like hot and sexy, but it's like so generative and beautiful about what it means to meet at the confluence of these two realms or worlds even of that like intimate point, but they don't it's not like it happens all the time. So how do we savor that intimacy? But I've been thinking about this idea of darkness and light of Ao and Po as thinking about how to, as an expansive way of thinking about intimacy, but also if it only happens at certain, like, how do you call it? Like, if it doesn't happen often and there's only moments you have to savor of that, how do you use your time with each other? How do you savor that mixing, if you will? And when I think about that, if I'm, returning to the kumulipo in different ways, or even in my practice, I think a lot of poets and writers, Noʻu included, have taught me the importance of citation and thinking about and always honoring where your ike comes from. And for me, I've been, trying to ensure and keeping myself accountable to what that means and looks like, because I come from a vast intellectual mo'oku auhau of thinking about like water in general, but also just like from Ike Hawaii of just generations, of course. And for me, whether that's in epigraphs or I love using like epigraphs of places of citation, or I've been exploring like footnotes too.
You have the poem, you incorporate Olelo no Eo.
Right.
That is so gorgeous. Yeah, so gorgeous.
So I was like wrote this structured as an abecedarian, but using, like as opposed to A through Z in the English alphabet, it's using the Olelo Hawaii alphabet, but using Olelo no Eo as lines to structure that. But it's about staging a mahu sex scene.
Wow.
So it's like very like kuapa, like all that kind of energy, and it's a lot.
I like Rita.
Yeah, I'm happy to share with you. But I had the opportunity to perform that piece for the first time in New York.
Wow.
And that experience alone really like changed how I think about like what it means to breathe poetry, and to breathe that out loud. But just generally, the practice of citation, even like the politics of translation in various ways shape a lot of about how I navigate my practice too. So that's like, and ensuring that we're expressing gratitude and honoring where that ike comes from is really, I know is a big kuleana I have as a poet. So
it's very Hawaii. Thank you for sharing. That's so interesting how you're experimenting with things like footnotes, citation, even Olelo no Eo in your practice, and weaving that ike kupuna through your work in very different, slightly reproductive, generative ways. So I'm really excited to see the kind of work that you start to produce in the future, because it just sounds, it sounds just incredible. I would like to return back to your work. Actually, I think in your collection of poems, you talk about remembering and severing. Can you share a little bit more about what those words mean to you in your poetry and how they're, I don't want to say applied, but how they're expressed? Yeah,
mahalo for that beautiful question. So I think at the time I was, when I was writing those pieces and just thinking about the different forms, or even just what kind of essence, what kind of message, the tone, I was really struggling with this idea of like severing and remembering, and trying to separate them as a binary, because we know binaries in various ways are colonial and problematic, and we do not stand the binary in this house.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Period.
And so I've been thinking a lot about severing and remembering kind of as not as a binary, but in a way to talk about pilina to my mahu oiwi body, in which I'm thinking about grief and desire and mourning and yearning, but in an expansive way to think about form as what happens when those things are happening simultaneously. If I'm trying to remember, but I feel so severed from my body and my relationship to my body, relationship to Mahu. How do I navigate that? And I think what the collection of those poems in the different and unique ways of one trying to remember different traditions, some that are OEV and some that are not, honoring those different ways of thinking about and relating to one's body, this idea of severing in not just colonialism in a way and heteropatriarchal ways. I think also feeling like one of the things that I was experiencing around the time of drafting those pieces was I was really experiencing beautifully and importantly, I think, is termed colonial dysphoria. And that comes from Omi Santa Cruz, who in their dissertation talks about this idea of colonial gender dysphoria, that this idea of feeling like your relationship to your body or identity, if you will, is impacted by colonialism and severed in different ways. And so that language, I think, which I'm incredibly grateful for. If you have a chance to read their work, I highly recommend it. They have a piece called Colonial Dysphoria that I think really helped me to think about and find the language to think about this idea of severing and remembering. And the idea of remembering, it might be, the remembering, that idea of trying to mend the pieces to fit the pieces back together, but also struggling with like just the skin, the layers of skin. And I use skin a lot in my writing because one, like I literally watched my like skin like shed growing up because I had really bad eczema and my skin was always peeling and cracking, and I would get so badly like teased for it. And so I was thinking a lot about this idea of what does it mean to try to remember your skin, remember what's shed, but also how do we remember our relationship to our body in perpetuity for our own survival. And so just kind of expanding on those ideas of releasing and resisting and trying to express and honor and affirm one's body in colonial dysphoria, as well as just feeling like moments when the skin just needs to shed and being an active witness to that, grieving it, but also what it means to desire more, I guess.
Hallelujah.
I have no idea if I'm making sense.
No,
but
you're writing. The poetry is flowing.
She's coming out one way or another.
Yeah. I love the idea of remembering our body. I think, as Kānaka, we remember our body, our ancestral ways through the sensory, just engaging in, everyday Kānaka kind things, making lei, dancing hula, being up in the nahelehele, working in the lo'i kalo, eating. These are ways we connect to the body and we connect to our senses, connect to our ancestors in really generative ways. And even this idea of shedding is also I feel like very Kānaka and very mo'o too. Yeah. I just wanted to affirm that everything you shared is maikai and very beautiful. And I, again, just so excited with how you're thinking through the body and you're thinking through senses in general, just things that we don't get a chance to slow down, like Noʻu says, and really just kind of be in that moment and really sit with the self and try to articulate what one is feeling through those by just sitting and slowing down and being with the self. But this idea of sense brings me to Noʻu's work in Poemouth. You draw on the central, ancestral and political process of poemaking. What drew you to that metaphor, and then what drew you to the metaphor, and what were you hoping, people, your readers, would get out of Poemouth?
Poemouth is a praise poem for lesbian sex and a specific lesbian sex act. And we've all had poi And what happens when you eat poi? The mouth is gorgeous.
Yes.
Glistening, just sticky and everything. So I don't have to like boom, bam, boom kanani. And I realized as writers, but not just as writers, all of us trying to ho'olula hui means that we have to contend with a lot of trauma and a lot of violence. And so sometimes grief and anger can get so much into our bones. Nothing wrong with being angry. Aloha is rage and rapture, right? As Haunani has written. But I realized like my first book was a lot of coming to terms with a lot of violence as a Hawaiian woman, as a queer Hawaiian woman.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to just write a poem about joy because we deserve joy too.
We do,
you know,
absolutely.
like we deserve beauty, we deserve pleasure, we deserve joy. And what brings me joy? And so, you know, you think about all the things that bring me joy and come on, let's write a sex poem. Let's write a lesbian sex poem. And poi mouth was just, that's it. It's poi mouth. But I started thinking about what it takes to make poi. And we all know that, you know, poi isn't born at Foodland.
Right.
Right? It's a longer process. And so just thinking about, and this is the Hawaiian we go back to Aina, we go back to Hawaii. And then thinking about just going even further than just the ku'i is choosing the right stone to be your pohaku ku'iai. And I just was like, oh my God. Just because I love thinking about, you know when you meet couples who are just so like, oh my God, you guys are so in love, right? How did you meet? Like, I want to know the mo'olelo.
Yeah.
And I'll wait and I'll earn the mo'olelo. But for me, when I meet people who are just so in love, and not just couples, but like friendships, oh my God, friendships, like kamauli, right? I want to know how y'all fell in love with each other because we can't forget our tenderness, right? If we're putting so much fight into writing this world, we better have our tenderness for after, right? So we gotta write about joy. We gotta write about sex. We gotta write about the fun things. And so when I thought about poi mouth, I wanted to go, we love a good sex scene, but hopefully the poem also kind of makes the reader wonder, but how did they meet? And that goes to the image of someone being so meticulous about spending days finding the right pohaku and all that care that step requires. And then it goes into, you know, fashioning the pohaku and then making the poi and then eating the poi. And the poem is a sonnet, and the sonnet is like a very durable global poetic form because it's so compressed. And like I said before, like poetry really, you have to know what you're saying. Like, what are you trying to say? And sonnets are only 14 lines. And so it's a very like thinking form. It's associated with love for love and, you know, wooing people and sharing affection. But more and more poets of color, indigenous poets, are using the sonnet form to stage political debates. Terrence Hayes, for example, has an incredible book, an entire book published of sonnets in response to Trump's first presidency. So the sonnet can do a lot. And because of its condensed form, because you got to say a lot of shit in 14 lines, means you have to be very precise with every single word. And sonnets are also about music. You have to pay attention to rhyme. And me, the end rhymes are not really my jam. I like kind of hiding rhymes inside, like poi and mo'i, you know what I mean? So it was just so much fun writing that poem and then reading it to my wife as it progressed, you know. It was, I mean, that's also part of our practice, right? Sharing our work and seeing how it lights up or how it doesn't light up our readers.
Wow.
I love that.
For the prudes out there who don't know, in our culture, sex is something that is celebrated.
Thank you.
That part.
Sex and writing, hakuing pieces about sex is something we've been doing for generations.
It's like so beautifully.
Beautifully
I
written.
cannot tell people enough. You don't know how intelligent and sexy my kupuna are.
Yeah, no,
You
for
don't
real.
even know. Read the new pepper. Like go and listen to
part.
mele.
Yeah, listen to the
on.
mele. Yeah. The waimu Kīkī, all of that stuff. Yeah. So mahalo, that is so cool. I appreciate that. You mentioned too the use of the word mo'i in your piece, and I think if I'm not mistaken, it was maka maka or.
Ew.
Yeah, maka maka. Was there a reason behind this sort of not hierarchization, but kind of a hierarchization between mo'i and maka maka? Was there? What was the idea behind with the use of those two hu'olalo, if you don't mind me asking?
So, and I think for me, the poem is an invitation to think about how we enact power during sex, after sex. You talk about slip and slide, hipakika, hipahe'e, right? And the roles that we slip into or slip out of when we are having sex.
Totally.
Because not always am I going to be, like, we slip in and out of different kinds of things when we are partnered. And it's not with one partner we're like this, with another partner we're like this. And so the poem really, and that's another thing I love about poetry. Poetry just, there's so much trust in, I'm not going to knock you on the head with it. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to like explain everything, because I think poetry is the oldest oral tradition, right? Our kupuna, we're just exquisite at it. And I feel like one of the intelligences of poetry is that trust. Like, I trust you to follow me. I'm going to earn you as a reader, but you're going to earn this poem too. And I trust that that's going to happen. If I've done my work well, then I earn my reader, and I've earned that trust. But I also trust that my reader's not stupid.
Right.
And my reader is ono, to like work for that ono in the poem, right? Yeah. So the poem is really an invitation to think about power dynamics in sex. And so it's really, I'm looking forward to seeing if readers be like, ooh, can I guess who the bottom is in that poem?
Literally.
Because the poem ends, poi mouth is mo'i mouth. Right? And rise and kiss me, ao, your sticky maka maka.
Ooh.
But then this whole thing about tops and bottoms, here we go again with the binaries, right? Yeah. Like you think that the top is the only power player and then the bottom is the submissive. And that if that's the jam, that's the jam, right? But I like it when a poem makes me think. When I leave a poem and I keep thinking about the questions it's asking me or the images it's given me. And I want people to think better about gay sex. Because there's such just dull, hateful things, just simple things thought about the way our pleasure works. Get out of here.
Right.
Like, there's so much more complexity and richness.
All the
and
cliches about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's think more expansively about the way our bodies enact desire.
Absolutely.
I love the idea of using like kauna to express, queer intimacy in the ways that you did. That's brilliant. We all should be reading Poi Mouth. And yes, we have to figure out who the top and who the bottom
And I
is.
think we should all get poi mouth.
We should all get poi
You can
mouth.
all get poi mouth in your own way, but eat well. Yeah.
Yep. Wow. Mahalo nui.
I love that.
I wanted to go back to Kamakani for this next question. You mentioned in your work, you describe Mahu as a love letter to creation. I adore that. I want to understand better, and I think perhaps our readers will. What does that mean in your own words? And you don't have to ahuvale everything and just lay bare all of the intricacies of what that means, but just give us maybe, if you can, and if you're feeling so generous, a little push into the meaning of that.
Yeah, mahalo for that question. Oh my gosh, I've been thinking about, well, one, just the idea of a love letter. I think I was thinking about it more when I was in your class, Noʻu, in your poetry writing workshop, about what is the role of a love letter, because my mother used to write me love letters all the time, even when we would not see her. And so in various ways, I think the love letter was, I feel like the letter form itself was one of the first poems I was ever taught. I think really it is a space and a generative space to think about witness, to think about how do we articulate pilina to, doesn't have to be just a person, but to an aina, to a vai, to all of it simultaneously, to akua in many different ways, because I was thinking about this idea of my relationship, what does pilina to mahu mean and look like for me. Even in some of the other pieces, I was like, sometimes it comes in fragments, sometimes it comes as laying all the English words out there and feeling seen in some and not in others. And ultimately, when I think about mahu as a love letter to creation, I think I was thinking about, again, going back to ocean feminisms, thinking about hanau ka'uku ko'a ko'a, about the coral polyp and how as one of the first life forms to be born from po, and how the coral resembles a place that is, like, I think biologically, not in a binary, but also as an akua of that's born from this darkness that brings so much life. When I think about a love letter to creation, I was writing a love letter to my partner, Makali'i, and I was thinking so much about how our being from Kalihi and then building a relationship with Kaneohe, where he's from, knowing that I need to love Kaneohe in order for me to love him, know the stream that flows literally right nearby our house, that feeds into the ocean that I, take a walk to often, being from both sides of the Ko'olau Mountains, and how I was also thinking about how Papa's journey from Tahiti to Hawaii, and the story of the mo'olelo of her and Wakea in Kilohana up at the top of Kalihi Valley, and how, just that intimacy, but also the struggle, the struggles that they had to navigate, the back and forth, just the different kinds of stories that are told about that place and what it means to learn and love from both sides of the Ko'olaus. Meeting at the Ko'olaus, I was thinking about love as this way, and I was thinking, about my relationship to Mahu in my physical movement and moving between these two places, and feeling like this is where the creation of our love comes from, of that catalyst for this aloha to bring us together. Felt like I was writing a love letter to creation as I was writing a love letter to him. And being makali'i, like just that kauna of that too, I was just like, oh my God, it's so... My mouth is salivating, and I'm craving so much more of that. And so in order for me to think about how my relationship with him and my relationship to my body and our intimacy and what aloha means back and forth reciprocally between us, felt like these collection of pieces, whether it's a fragment, it's a letter. I also used a duplex form, which is invented by Jericho Brown, which is a beautiful form. I think that he says the repetition and couplets are felt like a home with two addresses. And so I was thinking about the sort of two addresses and what home meant for me between the two places, and finding like that generative way of thinking about using language from like the Hawaiian dictionary of Mahu and seeing myself in some and struggling with others. And that's where that erasure, that blackout erasure comes from. That ultimately and collectively these pieces, although unique and engage different forms individually, collectively, for me, my hope is that it is a gift to our Mahui, to see that that our bodies and our desires and our joy is a love letter to creation, that we are love letters to creation. And that's how we resist colonial silences and our own erasure from ourselves.
That's brilliant. Brilliantly said. Thinking about historically, I mean, we've used aina in ways to express love, not only of the place, but also of its genealogy and its creation, how that binds us to a broader genealogy in general, to each other, to our ancestors, and how all of those kind of, are compiled in a way that form us. And so when we're writing writing about somebody else, we're bringing their aina into the conversation. We're talking about their aina and intimately sharing about their aina as a way to describe our love and our affection for another person, but at the same time, we're honoring the creation of that place. So that was really beautifully said. Thank you for, going there, going deep into it. But that being a form of resistance, which brings me to, back to a question for Noʻu. Again, back to poemouth. Poemouth is deeply embedded into aina-based knowledge. Like you talked about the action of kneading, wetness, all things we find in aina, and this being a part of an embodied practice of remembering. How does desire function as a form of resistance in your work?
I love that question. I love that question. Well, and like I said, right, for me, there's no writing about desire without aina, and there's no writing about aina without desire. Mm-hmm. Recently, I was corralled into a conversation with someone who's very important to me in my life, but it was kind of like this ambush of a conversation, and it was my wife and I were ambushed by this conversation, and it was, unfortunately, just someone who we both love, who is a very devout Catholic, pretty much, made sure to clarify that if we don't do certain things or change certain things about who we are and how we live our lives, that we will burn in hell. Mm. And then the conversation started and was stopped so fast that, like, both of us were just, our heads were really spinning, and it's someone that we love very dearly. And so that, that made me, and this wasn't the first time this has happened, so that's why I'm not like, right. I mean, the shit should not be happening anymore.
Right.
It shouldn't have happened when it first happened.
But, right.
It made me think, gay folk, LGBTQ+, mahu, trans, pa'awhawhine, whakaleiti, all of us, we may be acknowledged, we may be brought into conversations, but there are still many cases where we are banned from the sacred, where we are banned from any understanding of what is sacred and how we practice our relationship to sacred. And that made me, because that's that person's idea of sacred. And my wife and I are sitting there, flesh and blood human beings, but because of our love, because the way we build our life, we are not allowed 10 feet near this idea of sacred. But then I think about Hawaiians, and that's not the case at all for us. Like, we are an integral part, we all are an integral part of how we imagine sacred, how we practice sacred, how we teach sacred to each other. And I feel like when I write, when I perform, and I think, because I write poetry for the page, but there is nothing like performing for an audience, because you can look at your audience in the eye. Well, if you memorized, right? And I've had people in my audiences who, before watching me perform, probably would have sent me to hell as well. But this eye contact that you can do, and when you know what you're saying, because I've spent hours on crafting this, and then it's in your body, and your body has memorized this, and you can speak it and perform it, that's where the human comes across, right? And so I think about embodiment. When I think about embodiment, that's a big, for some people that can be like a big academic word. But for me, embodiment just means how I enter my body, how I am present in my body in relation to other bodies in the room. And there are people who have lived life and not a day has gone by where they didn't feel safe, where they every room they stepped in, their body was recognized.
Right.
But for Oiwi Wahine, for Indigenous women, for queer Indigenous women, sometimes being in our bodies can be very vulnerable, objectifying. It can be lonely. So if I can write a poem, perform a poem that helps another Indigenous woman, especially queer Indigenous women, woo, that's my voice coming back to me, not apologizing.
Shouldn't.
But if I can write a poem that makes her feel recognized and more able to be in her body, that makes me proud. And I wish I had more of that when I was growing up. Because I had, we were talking about this earlier. I grew up in the 90s.
The 90s.
And the 90s, you had to hunt for lesbians. Like, you had to just is that the counter for me? Is that the counter for me? No. And then, that was for among, white celebrities, white literature. Don't even bring me around, where the Indigenous lesbians. I had to find them. They were there, obviously. We have been there. We have been here since time immemorial.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
But who's publishing them? How many books were published by them? And where are they being sold? And that's the other side of this beast of being a writer. So yes, Indigenous lesbians have always been here. But in terms of visibility, that was not the case when I was growing up. And man, the things that are available today for young queer keiki, what that would have meant, I can't even imagine what would have been different if I had so many more mo'olelo that looked and loved like me.
Yeah.
That makes me think of hi'iaka, how we do have mo'olelo, but it's that access to it, and
Yes.
that's been difficult over the years, and how it's been interpreted and as well, which is how, if we're limited to English, which many of us have been for most of our lives, and we're reconnecting to Olelo Hawaii, accessing mo'olelo like that, where, quite clearly there is lesbian love going on in the mo'olelo. Just knowing that we do have it, but the fact that a lot of us didn't have access to it until more recently, I think it makes me sad, and it makes me sad to hear too that, your experience, while being really powerful and empowering, you've had moments of just a vulnerability where it's scary. It must be terrifying to be as you are in spaces, especially when there are still people, even in our lahui, who would rather not see us be here. And then to come from a place of strength and truth and knowing, no, we belong here. We've always been here. I'm going to write from this place, and hoping that a reader, another wahine on the other side will read this and feel like her embodiment is pono and just, and deserves to be seen. I just wanted to affirm what you were sharing, and thank you for being vulnerable with us.
Well, and that's why the joy is also important, because we cannot just be writing to tear each other's hearts out.
Right.
That's important to testify to, but we have to feed each other joy too. We have to tell each other, you're so beautiful. We have to talk shit. We have to do all the things, because we are complex people. We are not just our trauma.
Absolutely.
Yes, we are not just our trauma. And joy is such a big part of our culture as well. It's like such a big part. I mean, it's one of the first things that was attacked, I would say, by the Calvinist mission, and love them, but the Catholics as well. My family's Catholic, so I get it. Like, joy is like, if you're enjoying something, it's like immediate shame and guilt. And it's like, let's unpack that a little bit. But you're so right. Joy is such a Hawaii thing, and in so many different ways. And so we need to find time to be joyous and continue to make others feel joy, and not let it be a fleeting moment, but something we cultivate, every day for generations. I'm going to move, transition rather clunkily into shared themes, I think, between both of you and some of the work that you folks produced for this special issue. I want to go with this idea of colonial silencing, that you both write against it. How do you understand the relationship between poetry and survival, and between poetry and pleasure, since we were just talking about joy? I know give them.
Oh my God, those are such beautiful questions. Thank you. Oh my God, where do I even start?
We can start
the beginning.
from the beginning. Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
No, we had to bring Auntie Maria. Was it Auntie Maria Lani?
That was Auntie Maria Lani. Yes.
We can start with, how do you understand the relationship between poetry and survival?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think kind of going back to the piece about like writing sex scenes, I love writing sex scenes and continue to do that as a practice, because that's how we resist our erasure in different ways. And silence as an act, silence as a coerced thing sometimes, I think, is something I've been thinking about in different ways. I feel like who I was before I started writing poetry was a lot louder. I was a lot more firm and direct. And then when I started to write poetry, this was especially after my mom passed away, trying to heal from all the trauma of things that I was experiencing growing up, in my formative years and into adulthood. I became so much more of a soft-spoken person like I am today. I'm a lot more softer. I'm a lot more like crackly pitched person. And initially I thought that was a sign of my surrendering to my trauma. And then I started to realize maybe it's perhaps the authentic self I've been trying to become. Also, maybe that's a possibility. So this idea of writing poetry and survival, I think, is one to speak to a reader in a way that I can show up as my own authentic self, because the fact that I'm still alive today and I'm still surviving is because I've had to shed my skin. I've had to watch the oozing out of my skin. That's how I know in some ways that I'm surviving. And sometimes, even when that's not happening, the fact that I'm still here today and writing, one is kind of like to see over time how I've navigated and thought about my life, my intimacies, my relationships, my gratitude, my genealogies. I kind of talked about it earlier, but I have too many questions. That's too heavy for me to hold, for my body to hold. And I was actually writing this piece kind of about the sacred. I had written a piece for Noʻu and Kamali that's modeled after Billy Ray Belcourt's Sacred. In their intro to We Are Mauna Kea, I think the biography issue that you folks did, right from the beginning you ask, what does it mean to be a mountain? And I was like, what does it mean to be a mountain? You know, and it was actually writing that piece that has actually kind of shifted even today in my editing of it. But it was through writing that piece that I realized that because I have so many questions about how am I still here, about writing even different worlds, like alternative futures in which like survivance is still is something that naturally exists and does not have to be fought for. I think I realized then in writing that piece, and I think I wrote it in my craft analysis of that piece, that I write not because I need answers, but because I need a place to be held. And poetry is my place to be held. And poetry in that writing of joy and intimacy and desire is how I continue to survive. It is ultimately, like for me, I was just really thinking about this. I was like poetry is my pico that connects me to all of my like genealogies and within myself, physiologically and everything. And so poetry is ultimately how I survive in many ways, and being able to document and affirm my own survival. And I hope that I can do that for other readers.
Mahalo nui. Noʻu?
Yeah. I think what I want to say is that poetry by itself will not save the world, but that's true of everything. And, you know, like revolution is not a monocrop. Right? Our aina is like living proof that that's true. But if you're paying attention to the history of aloha aina in Hawaii, poetry and politics are practiced together, never separate. You go to a march, you go to a rally, you are going to have our organizers, you're going to have our mahi'ai, our lawai'a, our hula dancers, our keiki, our teachers, our haumāna, and you're going to have poets, you're going to have our visual artists, you're going to have people who we all show up. And, you know, our piko is so plentiful, right? So, you know, because I feel like one of the ways people react to art is that, what does it do? It does nothing. It does shit.
Right.
And it's like, well, it's not meant to be by itself. It was never meant to live by itself. It's activated when we are coming together. It's a kākou thing. So that's what my na'o kind of turns out when I think about poetry and resistance and poetry and silence. It's not meant to be alone. None of us are.
Absolutely.
What about poetry and pleasure? I mean, we talked about joy a little bit, but, you know, what is the relationship then between poetry and pleasure? I know that's kind of a simple question and can take you in like many different directions, but you both kind of shared a little bit about that. You know, poema, poetry and pleasure. But yeah, not to put you on the spot.
No, I love that question.
Loves the spot.
Loves the spot.
Well, initially when I started writing poetry, I had by choice not, you know, I told myself that if I were to build a pilina with someone in an intimate way, I would do it when I was ready. When I felt in my na'au that, and in my body that I was ready for it. When I first started writing poetry and being near going out into the ocean and pikaing and was when I was so ono. And I was just like, but I knew I wasn't ready yet. It became a place for me poetry became a place for me to articulate that yearning, to find a home for the yearning that wasn't just sitting like the tightness in my stomach, or like the growling of my stomach. And I needed, but I didn't think that initially that poetry was going to be one of the places that I could do that. But God forbid you release into the ocean. Like, be mindful of what that means is what Noʻu taught me. One of the many things that Noʻu taught me. And I love that idea because I think there's this struggle of like release and pleasure. I think poetry can be a place, at least it is for me, and has shifted and changed a lot of pleasure as a place to articulate desire and yearning, but also to be a place to return to Ike, as we've talked about before. I think the way that I've thought about pleasure in poetry, I could not have done, and I can't continue to do, if I'm not as cultural as much as I'm being political. As Haunani K-Track said, if the political people have to be cultural and vice versa, I think one of the things that I realized that I needed to do was to return to Mo'olelo, to Mele, to understand and just vala'auing with aunties and talking to the people who are like on the front lines and being in a relationship with those people. And I think ultimately how poetry and pleasure comes together is a way to also honor those genealogies of those people and those intimacies, and the places, lands and waters, etc. But it's, at least for me, with what I've been integrating more into my practice, is pleasure requires understanding and returning to Ike Kupuna, to Iwi Kupuna, in many ways.
I love that.
I'll start there.
Yeah, no, mahalo. I was just thinking about how yearning for that Ike like leads one to sort of dive into like the cold waters, that is Ike Kupuna, and feel the bite and stuff like that. And there's a pleasure in that, the coldest waters, if you will, of Ike. And so I think returning back to Ike Kupuna is something very pleasurable and something that
absolutely.
Is very joyous. And just I'm thinking back on my journey as well, learning as much as I possibly can, that those moments are, it's like, it just reminds me of the chant Mapuka Hanu Ali Ala. It's like, ooh, it's very, it's that cold at the end of the journey, when you're up in the mountains. It's that vibe, you know what I mean?
But then what happens, and this is what I love about Hawaiian poetry in Mele, what happens when you're cold? What do you want to do when you're cold?
Snuggle out. Yeah.
You want to snuggle, right? And then, and I think if you're thinking about that cold water as our, Ike Kupuna, and then you think, what do you want to do when you're cold? You want to snuggle up. So how your Ike Kupuna inspires your body to literally connect with another being, with another person, and share.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love it.
I love it.
I love that.
I love it.
And sometimes it's like, oh, I want the salty.
I want the
and
salty.
then I want the sweet.
Right.
Like sometimes it's too salty, or like it's really salty, and I need a little bit of that sweetness.
That sweetness, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like listening to your taste buds too, and letting that also, like, your kupuna guide you in that too.
Yeah.
So
yearning, there's an ono there for sure when you're yearning for something. Thank you for sharing. No'u, did you have any mana'o on poetry and pleasure?
It's just, you can't feel pleasure if you're numb. And numbing yourself has been a coping mechanism for a lot of people because we are up against genocide, poverty, climate change, like just militarization, extractive capitalism. They're spilling jet fuel in our waters. They're taking our mountains, failing to take our mountains. And so a coping mechanism is to numb yourself to all the shit, right? But then you lose touch with your body. You lose, like, there's a reason why we do that, why we shut off. But the danger of constantly numbing yourself to feeling means that you're not going to have that tenderness after the fight is over, right? We need to keep our aloha. Yes, struggle with your aloha for sure, but we need to keep our aloha intact for when we are building up our world the way we want it. And I feel like when I read something good, and it doesn't just have to be poetry, when I read something so good, I'm usually flying that book across my house. Like, how dare you be so accurate? Like, I'm just like, that's one of my ways of like responding to something that's so well written, because it gets in your body. Poetry begins in your body. It's the oldest oral tradition, and that is the opposite of numb. So I feel like, and that's why it's so important to have good people around you, because yes, turning on the feeling again is dangerous, because what if you're around bad energy? So yeah, I just feel like poetry works against us numbing ourselves, and it makes you feel, and you better get ready, because once you feel, and this is like Audre Lorde 101, but like once you feel like so full, like this is authentically me and I'm full. Once you feel that, how can you go back to half-ass full?
Right.
How can you go back to doing things that don't feed you like that?
Yeah.
How can you go back to relationships that don't feed you like that? You can't. So, and that's what poetry does for me. Poetry like reminds me what my full is, and reminds me of my standards of excellence, whether erotic or leadership-wise, creativity-wise. Yeah.
Mahalo. I feel like we're nearing the end of our little Kūkā Kīkī session. You guys are just dropping ike bombs about being full, about yearning, about being cold and connecting. We end these podcasts with a little Nino about if one has a momi they'd like to share with, just a little shiny momi that you'd like to share with our listeners, something that you weren't able to say throughout the podcast that you feel like you'd like to say now. Please feel free to do so. It'd be my honor to witness such momi.
Is this the last question?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I will end with Aole Ipau.
Aole Ipau. Polole.
So earlier I said there are many ways to ho'olulahui, and one of the ways is when you believe that our ea is connected to the ea of our comrades. One way to ho'olulahui is to stand up for your comrades. So I actually want to end with some words from a Palestinian writer,
Please.
Amanda Najib, who is a first-generation Palestinian-American member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective. And I came across this poem, and it just had so much echoes of haunani in it, because it's addressed to other Palestinian women who have passed, who are here, and who are yet to be born. But I am a proud Kānaka oiwi, and I proudly stand with Palestine.
Ew.
And so I'd like to read these words by Amanda Najib. You will not know all their names, but they loved you before you were born. They lit the dark with memory. They wrote your future in the margins of banned books. They saved you a seat at the protest. They folded your flag into the cradle. And when others said there is no Palestine, you will laugh, not because it isn't tragic, but because you carry the proof in your bones, your books, your breath. Go on, build what they could not destroy. Say your name like a spell. Say ours. Mahalo nui.
Mahalo.
Mai Hawaii nui a ke ai Palestina.
Ai.
Ahiki ke aloha aina hopeloa.
Period. With that, mahalo nui a olua. This was really magical conversation. I know that our listeners are going to glean from it many momi. I'm just forever grateful that we were able to share your voices and the voices from Palestine as well on our podcast. Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo. Mahalo nui for sipping the tea on Kūkā Kīkī. Until next time, e inu I ka wai I ke kupuna, a e hoʻohā inu I ka waha moʻopuna. Aloha.